Stay tuned for Butler on Business, coming up next on the Liberty Express.
Jason, would you please introduce Mark?
Alan, we're joined on the phone now by Dr. Mark Thornton. He's a senior resident fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute. He's the book review editor for the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics, and he's the author of several books, including The Economics of Prohibition. Dr. Thornton, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Well, Dr. Thornton, another area where the government has its hands in activities is that of prohibiting certain substances, prohibiting certain activities, and these prohibitions really have dire consequences, both intended and unintended. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your book, The Economics of Prohibition, and what you were hoping to accomplish with that book?
I'd absolutely love to. I've been studying prohibition, alcohol prohibition of the past, drug prohibition, marijuana prohibition of the present in other countries around the world. And what I found is that as enforcement is ratcheted up or as penalties are raised, what happens is that the entrepreneurs in the black market switch to higher potency drugs. They reduce the purity of drugs sold on the street, and all this increases the danger of using these drugs. And, of course, then they start moving from drugs from like marijuana and cocaine to things like crack cocaine, heroin, and crystal meth. Because of the economics of increased enforcement and increased penalties. So it's really the prohibition itself that's making these drugs so harmful and so deadly and dangerous. And now we're up to over 25,000 overdose emergency room visits for illegal and prescription drugs that are consumed for non-medical purposes. So this is a tremendous burden on our healthcare system. We've seen the crime rates, of course, high, and if we look around the world, we see that areas where prohibition is being enforced, the murder rate is just incredibly high. So we get more crime, we get more violence. The political system is corrupted, as we see in places like Mexico and Colombia, and even here in the United States, and obviously in places like Afghanistan, which is a drug-growing country. And then all the health consequences of keeping these, a medical issue or a social issue, trying to solve it with the billy club and the jail. What we see is the health consequences are just staggering. As I mentioned, the overdoses are incredibly high. HIV spread through dirty needles is very high, except in places where it's not an issue, like in Switzerland. They have needle exchange programs for drug addicts, and they have almost no spread of AIDS and HIV due to dirty needles. So it's incredibly counterproductive, and that's what people don't get. They think that if you legalize, you'll just get more of the same problems. You'll just increase crime and corruption and deaths and violence. And the reality is, if you legalize these things, they become normalized, and we start applying normal business practices, normal legal system practices, property right distinctions, and so forth, so that these things become normalized, and you don't generate all of these negative, ghastly social consequences.
Dr. Thornton, we had a guest on, Dan D'Amico from Loyola, who had actually pointed out that the war against drugs has become kind of an industry for law enforcement as a way of confiscating the ill-gotten gains of the trade.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our law enforcement system has grown tremendously as a result of this war on drugs, and they've taken away a lot of our constitutional rights and guarantees in the process. But look, I'm sure Dan talked about the prison system and how vastly it's grown over time. A lot of private prisons, but just prisons in general. And the vast majority of the people in prison are nonviolent drug offenders, and of course there are violent drug offenders as well in there. But the vast majority of all of our crime is directly or indirectly the result of the war on drugs. And, of course, if we legalize it, you normalize it, and there's none of this prison growth and breaking up families, putting breadwinners in prison, splitting up families. And, the reality is that also increases the burden of social costs of the welfare system because of breaking up families. And of course, it's really ghastly in the sense that black Americans are targeted in this whole process, and as a result make up a huge percentage of the prison population who are non-violent drug offenders African American men who are simply taken out of society and punished for basically not harming anybody whatsoever. And African Americans are vastly targeted in this whole war on drugs. It's just insane.
Dr. Thornton, in the most basic sense, drugs are, they're really a product like milk or shoes, or let me think of maybe a more dangerous one, I don't know, dynamite. How do we minimize the misuse of certain products or substances?
Well, that's something we also have to look at in terms of making people responsible for their actions. And so you have to look at the so-called social safety net and reevaluate that. The social safety net means that you get free ambulances, hospitals, emergency rooms, medicine, doctors, the whole nine yards. Plus, if you lose your job, you're backed up by welfare and unemployment insurance and all the rest. And those sorts of things, which we all think are fine and dandy, actually contribute greatly to irresponsible behavior. And so the marketplace punishes people for irresponsible behavior. Alcoholics and drug addicts are less likely to get jobs. They're less likely to get promoted. They're less likely to be successful entrepreneurs. And so the marketplace is where the reality hits is one of the best teachers of responsible behavior. And drugs can be consumed responsibly, but they can be consumed irresponsibly. And government has shown a complete, absolutely inability to do anything about that. And from my view and what my book shows is that all of their efforts actually contribute to irresponsible drug use that tends to generate social consequences and burdens for the taxpayer. And so we have to do everything possible to make sure that our society is such that the support system becomes much more privately oriented and much less government oriented, so that people are evaluated on a case-by-case basis whether or not they're worth helping, and less so that these things are an absolute given right that the government demands no matter what.
Dr. Thornton, in your book, The Economics of Prohibition, the history is there. You have historical examples. The economics is there, and you also provide a general theory, a general framework in which to analyze a lot of these issues. How can our listeners best find a copy of your book?
Well, you can go to Mises.org and order a copy, but you can also go to Mises.org and in the search button put The Economics of Prohibition PDF, and you'll be sent to a link where you can get a free electronic copy of the book. And I encourage everybody to do that. And if you like it, you think it's worthwhile, buy a copy. It's real cheap.
Well, Mises.org is certainly a great resource. You guys have a ton of great free information, as well as you're alluding to, opportunities to purchase books and watch a lot of videos, and we certainly appreciate everything that you guys do down there.
Yeah, we're open 24/7, 365. Everything's for free. The books are really cheap if you want a hard copy, and there's no registration or anything, and it's the largest economic web page in the world, one of the most trafficked web pages in the world, and I encourage everybody to go and check it out.
Well, Dr. Thornton, we're running out of time, so we're going to have to leave it right there, but we certainly appreciate your time today on the show. Again, we've been speaking with Mark Thornton. He is the author of the book, The Economics of Prohibition, and I strongly urge everybody to go to Mises.org and check it out.
Thank you.